The Federal Reserve just released a number, a single number that is supposed to tell you how wealthy the average American is. And on paper, it looks pretty good, encouraging even. The kind of number politicians quote at rallies and economists cite at conferences. The median American household net worth is around $192,000. $192,000. That sounds fine. That sounds like things are okay. That sounds like the country is doing all right. Except almost none of it is what it seems. Because when you pull back the curtain on that number, when you look at where the wealth actually is, what it's made of, who it belongs to, and how stable it really is, you start to see something that the headline figure was never designed to show you. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with a simple question. What does it even mean to be worth something? Net worth is the math version of financial health. You add up everything you own, your savings, your investments, your home, your car, and then you subtract everything you owe, your mortgage, your car loans, your credit card balances, your student debt. Whatever's left over, that's your net worth. If it's positive, you're ahead. If it's negative, you owe more than you own. Simple enough. Now, the Federal Reserve tracks this data meticulously through a survey called the Survey of Consumer Finances, which they run every 3 years. It is the most comprehensive snapshot of American household wealth we have. And according to the most recent data, the median American household net worth is roughly $192,000. That number has actually grown significantly over the past decade. In 2010, it was closer to $87,000. So by that measure, Americans had more than doubled their net worth in about 12 years. That is a remarkable stat. That is the kind of number that gets written up with optimistic headlines. But here is where we need to slow down. Because there are two ways to measure average in statistics. There's the mean, which adds everything up and divides by the number of people. And there's the median, which finds the exact middle. Half the people are above, half are below. When it comes to wealth, the difference between those two numbers tells you almost everything. The average net worth of an American household, that's over $1 million. The median, $192,000. That gap between $192,000 and over $1 million is not a rounding error. It is a story. It is the story of who actually has the money. Here is an analogy that makes this visceral. Imagine a bar with 10 people in it. 9 of them have a net worth between $0 and $200,000. One of them, the guy in the corner nursing a scotch, is worth $50 million. If you average out the wealth in that room, everyone's average net worth is somewhere around $5 million. By mean statistics, you're drinking in a room full of millionaires. But the median tells the real story. Most people in that bar have maybe a couple $100,000 to their name, if that. Now scale that bar up to 130 million households in the United States. The top 1% of American households hold approximately 30% of all household wealth in the country. The top 10% hold over 66%. That means the bottom 90% of American households, roughly 117 million families, are splitting just 34 cents out of every dollar of wealth that exists in this country. And the bottom 50%, they hold about 3%. 3%. That's not a crisis you can see from the outside. People have cars, people have phones, people are eating out. The surface of American life looks reasonably okay. But when you measure what people actually own versus what they owe, the picture is startlingly different from what the headline number implies. So let's talk about where the $192,000 actually comes from, because the composition of that wealth matters enormously. The single biggest driver of American household net worth is home equity. For most American families, their home is not just where they live, it is the overwhelming majority of their wealth. If you strip home equity out of the equation for the average middle-class household, the remaining financial assets often drop to surprisingly little. And that creates a very specific kind of wealth, illiquid, geographically fixed, non-diversified. You cannot pay for your kids' college tuition with your kitchen. You cannot retire off your living room square footage unless you sell the house or take out a loan against it. Home equity is real wealth, but it is also wealth that is extraordinarily difficult to actually use without fundamentally disrupting your life. Now layer on top of that the retirement account picture. About half of American workers have no retirement account at all. Zero. No 401k, no IRA, nothing. For households that do have retirement savings, the median balance is somewhere around $87,000. That sounds okay until you run the math on what it takes to retire. Financial planners generally suggest that to replace your income in retirement, you need roughly 25 times your annual expenses saved up. If you're spending $50,000 a year, which is a pretty modest lifestyle in most American cities today, you need $1.25 million, not $87,000, not even close. So we have a country where the typical household has most of their net worth locked in a house they plan to live in forever, a retirement account that is maybe 7% of what they'll actually need, and meaningful financial assets beyond that, often close to nothing. The $192,000 is real. It's just doing a lot of heavy lifting to obscure a much more fragile picture. Now here is where it gets interesting, because the last decade wasn't just good for American net worth, it was extraordinary, and the mechanism behind that explosion is something most people don't fully understand. Between 2010 and 2022, American household net worth roughly doubled in aggregate. Trillions of dollars of new wealth appeared, and the driver of almost all of it was two things: rising home prices and rising stock prices. Home values across the country surged, particularly after 2020. The pandemic created a bizarre real estate paradox where remote work, low interest rates, and constrained supply sent prices to levels that would have seemed absurd 5 years earlier. People who already owned homes watched their net worth swell without doing anything at all. Stock markets did the same. The S&P 500 went from roughly 2,500 at the start of 2020 to over 4,800 by the end of 2021. If you had money in the market, you made extraordinary returns in a very short window. Which sounds great, except think about who actually benefits from rising home prices and rising stock prices. People who already own homes, people who already own stocks. The median American does own a home, so they did benefit to a degree, but the distribution of that benefit was wildly skewed. The wealthiest 10% of Americans own roughly 89% of all stocks. When the market rallies 30%, they capture 89 cents of every dollar of that gain. Meanwhile, a household with $15,000 in a 401k and $200,000 in home equity saw their portfolio tick up a few $1,000s, while their wealthy counterparts watched millions materialize. The rising tide lifted all boats, but some boats are yachts and some boats are rafts, and the water rose a lot faster than the raft could climb. There is also a shadow side to this wealth story that almost never makes the headline: debt. Total American household debt is currently sitting north of $17 trillion. That's not a government number. That is what individual American families owe. Mortgages, car loans, student loans, credit cards, medical bills. The average American household carries over $100,000 in total debt. For many, the mortgage is the largest piece, but the fastest growing categories? Auto loans and credit cards. The average American credit card balance has been hitting record highs. The average interest rate on that credit card? Around 20 to 22%. That is not a borrowing cost. That is a financial trap with a lock on it. Every month you carry that balance, a fifth of what you owe is being added back in interest charges. And yet we count net worth and feel okay because the house went up in value. Here is the uncomfortable math. If your home is worth $350,000 and you owe $280,000 on the mortgage, your home equity is $70,000. That shows up as an asset on your net worth statement. But if you're also carrying $12,000 in credit card debt at 21%, you are paying roughly $2,500 per year in interest charges alone. That's almost 4% of your home equity every single year just disappearing into interest. You are simultaneously watching your paper wealth grow and watching real cash leave your account every month to service debt. That tension, paper wealth going up, actual financial pressure staying the same or getting worse, is one of the defining contradictions of American financial life right now. Let's zoom out even further, because there is a generational dimension to this that makes the picture even more complicated. Baby boomers, currently in their 60s and 70s, hold approximately half of all household wealth in the United States. They bought homes when median home prices were 3 or 4 times the median income. Today, the median home price in the United States is closer to 6 or 7 times the median household income, and in major cities, far more than that. A 32-year-old today making $75,000 a year in a mid-sized city is looking at a median home price that might be $350,000 to $450,000. After saving for a down payment, they're carrying a mortgage that consumes 35 to 40% of their gross income. They're starting that home purchase later. They're building equity later. They're starting to save for retirement later. And the wealth gap between generations is not closing, it's widening. The median net worth of households under 35 in America is roughly $39,000. For households aged 65 to 74, it is over $400,000. That's a 10-to-1 ratio, and it has grown more extreme over the past 3 decades, not less. Now, you could argue that's natural. Older people have had more time to accumulate, which is true, but the rate of accumulation for younger generations is falling behind what previous generations experienced at the same age. A 30-year-old today has, on average, significantly less wealth than a 30-year-old in 1990 had, adjusted for inflation. This is not a story of personal failure. This is a structural shift, and it has enormous implications for what happens when the largest generation in American history fully retires and a smaller, less wealthy generation takes over the economic weight. Which brings us to the most important question. What is wealth actually for? Because on one level, a net worth figure is just a number. It is a snapshot of a moment. Your home's value fluctuates, your stock portfolio swings, your debt changes. Net worth isn't destiny. But net worth at its core is a proxy for security, for the ability to absorb a shock, for the margin between living your life and surviving it. When economists talk about a wealth buffer, they mean how much runway do you have if your income disappeared tomorrow? If you lost your job, had a medical emergency, needed to support a family member, how long could you sustain yourself without falling apart? For roughly 60% of Americans, that answer is somewhere between 3 months and never. Surveys consistently show that a large portion of Americans could not cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing money or selling something. That is not a population sitting on $192,000 in accessible, deployable wealth. That is a population whose wealth exists on paper in an asset they can't easily touch, against which they are still paying debt. That net worth figure tells you something, but it does not tell you whether someone is one layoff away from a crisis. It does not tell you whether the $150,000 in home equity will matter when the roof needs replacing and the medical bills are coming in and the car just died. Security is not a number on a balance sheet. Security is the gap between your floor and the ground, and for millions of American families, that gap is much thinner than any chart suggests. Here's what we know with reasonable confidence. American wealth, in aggregate, has grown. It is not evenly distributed. Most of it is concentrated at the top. Most of what the middle class owns is tied up in a house. Most people are carrying real, expensive debt alongside that asset. The generation entering prime wealth-building years is doing so in a structurally harder environment than previous generations, and the metrics we use to describe this, the headline numbers, the mean figures, the aggregate surveys, are optimized for reassurance, not clarity. The $192,000 median net worth is a real number, but so is the fact that the bottom 50% of American households share 3% of the country's wealth. Both of those facts exist simultaneously. Both are true. The question is which one you are looking at when you decide if the picture is fine. There's a version of this story where the numbers improve, where wages rise, where housing becomes more accessible, where retirement savings become more universal, where the debt burden eases. And there's a version where the structural trends that have driven inequality for the last 40 years continue, where asset prices keep inflating and keep concentrating, where the wealth of the bottom half remains thin and fragile and perpetually one bad event from collapse. Both versions are possible, but what is not possible is pretending the median number tells the whole story, because it never did. The real net worth of the average American depends entirely on which American you mean. And that question, that specific, uncomfortable question, is one this country has been quietly avoiding for a very long time.